Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming. It's good to be with you today. I know we are here virtually, but I am actually coming to you live from the St. Louis campus here. I'm up in the HR conference room as we speak. So it's good to be back on site. And some of you I know have met with, at least to me, she's right here, Beth Mosshart, who is up on the ELSA campus and has been for the last few days while I've been down here in St. Louis. So it's been great to see all of you and nice to be back. So thank you again for coming. Today we're going to be talking about probably the most commonly asked question about retirement in general, and that magic number, if you will. Do I have enough to retire? And what you'll see through this is that the answer to that question is really not a number. It's more of a process. We are going to talk about the number, and we're going to talk about how you can start to approximate that number. But really, it's just to begin the discussion of kind of how you work through that process. The answer is not the same for everybody. And the answer for everybody continues to evolve as your situation evolves, as you get closer to retirement, as you are in retirement, whatever retirement ends up meaning for you. Okay, so this is just hopefully to help you understand it. We're going to go through it. The goal is to go through this in about 20 or 25 minutes. Certainly, we'll be open for questions. I will have time at the end for questions. So feel free, if you do have questions along the way, again, feel free to jump in. Everybody's muted at the moment, but you do have the ability to unmute yourself and just ask questions, okay? But again, you can also write them in and I'll see them. So let's start rolling. So I'm going to share my screen here. I have a little bit of a presentation. Some of the stuff that we're talking about is a little bit easier to see. So again, my name is Mike Bassaro. I think everybody on here knows me, and I know I've spoken to I think everybody on here at one time or another. Beth Mosshart is with us this week up in ELSA, as I said. Jason Fisher, who many of you also know, is not on this trip, but he will very likely be back on our next round down. So right off the bat here, we want to talk about why this is so important. Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask for participation, but I'm going to assume an answer because most people, when you ask the question of what is your largest purchase in your lifetime, most people just reflexively answer, well, it's my house, right? Well, the average cost for a house, these numbers are a couple years old, so I realize some of you might be looking at that number and saying, yeah, not anymore. But the average price for a house across the United States is a little over $215,000. And anyone who knows me will know that clearly I'm trying to trick you, because the answer to the largest purchase for most people in your lifetime is not your house. It is actually your retirement. Okay? The average retirement for the average amount of time across the United States costs significantly more than the average home. Okay? And these numbers obviously can vary wildly. But the point in bringing this up is, if any of you have bought a house before or have bought multiple houses before, you think about how much time goes into searching for a house, for going through the financing steps of buying a house, all of the things that go with it, insurance and everything else. And think about how much time people spend planning their retirement over their entire life. And it is usually drastically different. Okay, so again, this is just a way to kind of start easing into that process a little bit, but just to remind everyone of really how important that is. Okay, so the first thing when you're thinking about how much you need for retirement might sound obvious, but it's an important step, is to think about what retirement will look like. I think a lot of people have kind of a stereotypical idea of what retirement is supposed to be. You know, it means no more work, and it means being home, and it means, playing golf or gardening or doing this or that or visiting family, and all those things are often part of it. But retirement, especially nowadays, I don't think is anywhere close to as stereotypical as a lot of people assume. So, for some people, it doesn't mean the end of work or the end of income. And maybe it means a different version of it. Maybe it means a different version of it for a few years and then a transition to where there is no income. So you have to think about what you want to be when you grow up. Okay. So evaluate your situation. Think about those sources of income. Think about some of the expenses that are going away. Perhaps things are paid off. But you also have to think about things that might be coming on. Do you have family members, whether they are younger or older, that may need some care, where you might have some financial obligations? Might there be some money, this is never a fun thing to talk about, but might there be some money that is coming perhaps from other relatives at some point in the future? Obviously, we don't want to plan for those things directly, or let me say that better. We don't want to rely on those things directly, but we do want to think about it as part of the plan if it is relevant to you. Okay, so you think about retirement in a little bit more detailed way than a lot of people tend to do. Okay, now what are we trying to avoid? What we are trying to avoid is everybody's backup plan, which is, again, I'll answer for you since I know in this format it's a little bit easier or a little bit more difficult, but we hear this all the time. Well, if all else fails, I'll just be what? And the answer is always, well, I'll just be a greeter at Walmart. What we want to avoid are too many people trying to have this job all at the same time. Okay. So, if there were as many people that were greeters at Walmart that said they wanted to be greeters at Walmart, it would replace Disneyland as the happiest place on earth. So, we want to try and avoid this. Now, if this is what you want to do, fantastic, but we don't want people having to go back into these roles that haven't planned to do that. Okay. So what are the risks of retirement nowadays? Well, people are living longer. Inflation has obviously been a very hot button issue, especially over the last year and a half. Rising costs, especially in long-term care or certain types of healthcare situations. People who have had to use their accounts in ways that maybe were not exactly what we hoped to do, maybe through loans, or things that have reduced the value of the retirement accounts before the times came for actual retirement. Overly conservative asset allocation. This is not something we're going to talk about too much today, but there's an idea out there, and it's largely true, and many of you who've talked with us over the years have heard versions of this. In general, you do want to get less aggressive as you get closer to needing your money to produce income for you. Okay, notice I did not say as you get closer to retirement. Right? That was not a mistake. I said, as you get closer to needing your money to produce income for you. That may happen before you actually retire. For some people, that may not happen right at retirement. So it's important to understand what that time frame is. And then a lot of people misunderstand how much they can withdraw from their accounts without really starting to threaten the overall value. That is something that I'm going to be talking about more in just a second. Okay, so the magic question, what is that number? People often will get fixated on these nice big round numbers, and maybe that number is right for you, maybe it isn't. Unfortunately, we have seen people many times who have ideas in mind of numbers that they need to hit, and they leave their accounts vulnerable or in a growth position to hit these numbers. And they leave themselves open to maybe a sharp pullback right before they need that money, when in reality, that number wasn't really necessary for them to retire in the way that they want. Okay, so How do we start to understand that? The first thing we have to talk about is the B word, the budget. Okay. Now, most people don't really like to budget. Some do. I happen to know a few people who really love it in deep ways, but the vast majority of people don't really like to talk about budgeting. Okay. But especially as you are getting closer to retirement, and I would argue even in the first few years of retirement, understanding budgeting is a very, very important thing. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to track every single penny of what you are spending. Some people do it that way, and that's great. But there are many ways to budget. But understanding what your expenses are and doing, in some cases, a little bit deeper dive, whether it's through a tool that we have, which is what the little bit of a screenshot is on this page. There's a million different systems out there now that can help you. I don't care if it's a piece of paper or some highly integrated computer system. Whatever system works for you is the best one in the world. Okay. But understanding what your spending needs are going to be generally starts with truly understanding what your expenses are now, and putting them out on paper or in digital form can be a very good process to help you understand what's going to be the same, what we can expect to just go up, say, with inflation, what might drop off, and what might come up in those times. Now, the other thing about budgeting is that most of the time when people hear me or Beth or Jason or somebody in a similar position say that you need to budget, what they often hear is, Mike is telling me I'm spending too much money. Okay, I need to cut back. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that you have to understand what those expenses are. Okay. So being told that you need to go on a budget is not automatically a negative thing. It just means that we have to go through and get a deeper understanding of where your money is going. Okay. But it's an important part of this beginning process. Now, here is retirement planning in a nutshell. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. The financial services industry has gone out of its way for years, for decades, to convince everybody that this process is this massively complicated black box type information where it can only be solved with the perfect process or the perfect program or product, God forbid. The truth is, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It really can be quite simple. How much does your life cost? Okay, as best we can tell. What sources of income do you have coming in? And first, we're going to say, what sources of income do you have coming in that we can reasonably call guaranteed? Now, for most people nowadays, that just means Social Security. And I realize some of you probably rolled your eyes just now when I said Social Security is guaranteed. If you want to see more details on Social Security, our last session, which is still recorded and still available on our YouTube channel, we do a little bit deeper dive into that. But the short version is, sometimes the death of Social Security is a bit exaggerated. Okay. It has some challenges. It has some very serious challenges. But we don't think that it's right or necessary to say, oh, no, it's not going to be there. It is going to be there. The only way that Social Security doesn't exist is if nobody in the entire country is working, okay, and paying into the system. Now, if we are in a situation where nobody in the country is working, something really bad has happened and we've got other problems to worry about. All right. So Social Security is challenged, it is threatened, but not the whole amount. Okay. So again, if you want to see more details on that, we have a session that goes into it in much more detail. But we look at Social Security and any other sources coming in that we can reasonably call guaranteed. Okay. For some people, their guaranteed sources of income cover their expenses, some of them with room to spare. If you're in that position, fantastic. Anything that you have saved really is just gravy. It's extra. It is for emergencies or for unexpected things or for fun things, whatever you want it to be. Most people have a gap between those numbers, the gap between what your income needs to be and what your expenses need to be and what your guaranteed income is going to be. The question about, do you have enough for retirement? The answer is you have enough when you can comfortably fund that gap, ideally in a sustainable way. Okay. So how do we calculate that? How do we think about that? Well, there's the real way to do it, obviously, is to customize it for each of you individually, and we can help you do that. But there are some rules of thumb that you've probably heard before that are important to consider during these times. One of them, you've probably heard of something called the 4% rule. This is a financial planning rule of thumb that has been around for a long time. It is much debated, okay? And anytime when you hear something that says a rule of thumb, what you should hear at some level is flawed. Okay, every rule of thumb is flawed at some level. This one is no different. Okay, if you were to Google the 4% rule right now, you'd find 50 million articles as to why it works and 50 million articles as to why you shouldn't pay attention to it at all. We believe that while it is imperfect, it's a good starting point. Okay, and the next couple of slides that you're about to see are based on this idea. The idea with the 4% rule is that it is, over time, it is expected to be relatively easy to get conservatively speaking, a 4% rate of return without threatening the overall value of your account. And I would agree with that, that's a fair expectation, especially with interest rates coming back up. That's actually, this conversation has changed dramatically just in the last couple of years. Okay, well, last couple of months, really. But the idea then is, if you're taking out 4% and getting 4%, whatever amount you have at retirement, you will still have, if you're 138. Okay. Now, not everybody's goal needs to be to live to 138 and die with the same amount of money they started with. Okay. But that's what the idea of that 4% rule is. It's thought to be a conservative rate of return that can be sustained over time. And if your distributions are in this range, then it is thought to be sustainable. Okay, now the same thing happens if you are getting 13.78% and you're spending 13.78%. Same thing happens if you're getting 2% and spending 2%. Obviously, the higher that number goes, the higher your demand on those assets becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain it over time. Okay, so let's use the 4% rule and let's flip it around and do it backwards to give you an idea of what these numbers look like. Okay, so here's a good rule that we can use that is based on the 4% rule. We call it gap times 25. So remember that very scientific math that I did here, where it said, okay, the amount of expenses that you have and the sources of income that you have coming in. We take that gap, the annual amount that you need to withdraw to maintain your expenses, and you multiply it times 25, and it gives you roughly what your magic number needs to be. So let me give you an example. Let me give you 2 examples. So let's say that you go through this whole thing and you figure out that your gap is about $1,000 a month. Okay, you're going to need to withdraw $1,000 a month to maintain your expenses at the level that you would like. How big does the pool of assets need to be based on that rule? Well, remember, the answer is ideally about $300,000. And see the math here. $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year times 25 is $300,000. Okay, doing it backwards, 4% of 300,000 is $12,000 per year. Again, divided by 12. And there's your $1,000 a month. Okay, if the number is a little bit bigger, if the need is $2,500 a month, what is an ideal number based on this calculation? Don't be scared here before I show you this number, because I'm going to talk you through it in just a second. But if the number is closer to 2,500, based on the math, it means that ideally we'd love to see the assets at about 750,000. Now, I realize this might have scared you. Don't be scared yet. Okay. Remember what we're talking about here. We're not, you might be sitting there going, well, I'm spending $2,500 a month and I don't have anything close to $750,000 saved. Remember what this is. We're talking about the gap. We're not talking about all of your expenses. We're talking about your expenses that are not covered by other sources of income. And also remember that this rule, this 4% rule, is based on maintaining whatever your account balance is indefinitely for your entire life. If you start, just because you're over that number or over the rate of return that you're getting doesn't automatically mean that you're not going to be able to retire. It means that over time, you're going to start cutting into that account value, and it will start to bring it down. Will it bring it down too fast? Well, it depends on your situation. It depends on the drawdown. But for many people, if it draws down and you only have 400,000, if you start with 750 and you at the end you have 400, well, that would probably be considered a success. But again, I don't want you to be overly excited by these numbers or overly upset by these numbers. This is just a starting point for these calculations. Okay. But based on these numbers, these are the types of things that we can say based on this math are comfortable to maintain over time. Now, it may be that a 5 or a 6% rate of return is fair to assume, and it is for many people, I would argue. And if that's the case, then the principal that you need is quite a bit lower, doing that math backwards. All right. So again, this is one illustration with one rule that is admittedly flawed, but it's a good starting point to kind of understand whether or not you're in the ballpark of having the amounts that you need. Okay. So if just to talk about, all right, well, if you're not there, how can we get there? Well, there's a couple different ways. One, certainly saving a little bit more along the way, perhaps, especially if you have a little bit more time to get there. These are the contribution limits that were upped significantly in 2023. Everybody in their 403B can contribute $22,500 this year. If you are over age 50, you are allowed to do an additional $7,500 for a total of $30,000. This number has jumped quite a bit in the last few years because it's tied to inflation. Okay. If you have an IRA, the numbers are a little bit lower, same idea, $6,500 for everyone, an additional $1,000 for if you are over age 50. Okay. So, saving more can be a great way to obviously to help you and boost towards these numbers, but there are other ways to do it, particularly if you're closer to retirement. Saving more may not be the most efficient way. It's still important and it's still part of the process, but in some cases, the more efficient way to do it might be reducing expenses, reducing this side of the equation, so that the needs that have to be maintained are a little bit lower. Okay, so how fast can we assume that an account will grow over time? Just to visualize this, and remember, this continues to happen even in retirement. But there's a mathematical principle that you can reference here that gives you an idea of how fast an account can grow. It's called the rule of 72. It's used a lot in investments. And basically what it does is says it takes your rate of return. You take your rate of return, you divide it into the number 72, and it tells you in years how long a pool of money takes to double. Okay. So at a 10% rate of return from all sources, contributions, growth, everything, a 10% rate of return, the account will double in just a shade over 7 years. Okay. At say 6% growth, it takes about 12 years. All right. So again, that process happens and continues to happen even in retirement. But what else can we do to prepare? Again, as I already said, reducing ongoing payments, often in the form of debt. Those are powerful ways to improve your stance towards retirement, especially as you're getting closer. Remember that math that I showed you a minute ago? It works in the other direction. Okay. If you cut $1,000 out of your expenses, it is roughly equivalent to eliminating the need for $300,000 in savings over the average lifespan. Okay. Or excuse me, the average retirement time frame. Right. So now not everybody, a thousand might be too much to eliminate, but even if it was 400 or 600 or every little bit helps. And when you look at the math over time, it helps tremendously. Right. So when, if someone has a bit of a gap in their savings and they're getting close to retirement, it's not always feasible to say, oh, well, just, you have a year and a half, we'll just save another $200,000. Okay, well, that's not realistic for the vast majority of humanity. But what may be realistic is working on your budget and cutting out $600 or $700 worth of expenses, which essentially is the same thing. And it's permanent. You don't have to worry about the market. You don't have to worry about how that 200,000 might be behaving. When you eliminate those obligations, they typically are gone permanently. Okay. Any type of preparation comes with getting informed. You are all doing this right now by watching this session, and taking advantage of the other things that are out there, learning about Social Security, learning about your mortgage, learning about other ways of handling certain financial decisions. So I commend you for doing that. There's a lot more material that you can get from us. There's a lot of material out there. There's infinite material out there, which can be good and bad. But you're doing a great thing just by going through this and perhaps thinking about it in a little bit different way. Okay. Focusing on your budget, withdrawal strategy, you've covered that in quite a bit of detail. Understanding the rules around your benefits, your retirement, your certain types of insurance plans, understanding what may be on your plate in terms of expenses, and what may not be on there, and understanding how the accounts work. Again, all things that we can help you with. Okay. Healthcare, long-term care needs, how those are going to change. And I said Social Security. Understanding Social Security is very, very important. Don't listen to some of the hype that just says, oh, I don't need to worry about it. It's not going to be there anyway. Understand what it means. Understand how those benefits work for you, especially if you are married. Spousal benefits have some unique features to them that allow you, in many cases, to boost benefits or to receive benefits in ways that you may not be thinking about. Okay. So, that's really it for this. Just a quick reminder, of who we are for anyone on today or anybody watching in the future that may not be as familiar with us. Just remember that we are the resource that Principia has brought in to be an independent voice as a financial advisor, as an investment manager, to help you with your accounts, to help you navigate, any type of financial question. We're here as a resource, and we are here as a do-it-for-you solution for the management of your retirement accounts. Everything under the umbrella of Principia, whether it's at Transamerica or the older plan at TIAA or any other things like that, all services provided are paid directly by Principia. There is no charge to you for any of our services, whether it's just sitting down to meet with us or whether it's having us ultimately manage your accounts under the umbrella of Prin. We are a full service advisory firm. If you have any questions outside of the plan, we can help you with that too. We can help you manage those assets if you'd like. That is something we would describe all of the details about that. But anything in the PRIN plans, whether you are working, whether you are retired, whether you are separated voluntarily or otherwise, if your money is in the PRIN plan, even in the future, and you are not employed by Principia, the service is still set up that you have access to us. Okay. So, again, we're not Transamerica. We are not eliminating Transamerica. We are working inside of the Transamerica account and providing that help for you. Okay, so that's it for this session. I think I was aiming for 25. I was pretty close. I might have gone a minute or two over. But that is, as you can see, Beth and I are on site right now. We are actually, we've been here for the last few days, and unfortunately, we don't really have any other times available during our time here. We're heading back out this evening. We will be back in the fall, but you do not have to wait for our dedicated times on site. If you have questions, if you'd like to set up a meeting, whether it's on Zoom or over the phone or any other way, we can do that at any time to talk about this or anything else. So, does anybody have any questions? Again, if you have, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, or if you'd like to type them in. Anybody have anything they'd like to ask about this or anything else? No? Beth, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I was just going to ask a smart alecky question about Jason, but I decided not to do it. No, it's a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. No, so there's a few messages coming in. Thank you all very much. If I'm not hearing any other questions, I think we'll stop the share here. And again, if you have any other questions in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you again for stopping in with us today, and we'll see you soon.
See you later. Lovely to see you.